Alrighty, here we go. Yo, my revolutionaries. Today, we are going to be looking at something I think is rather interesting. Um, and it's like come about as a result of kind of my own interactions with certain people when it comes to the kind of debating, like, communism and like kind of, I don't know, communist societies that happened like in the 20th century, like in the USSR and stuff like that. I'll give you an example. Like I'll often see commentary to the effect of like, oh, the Soviet Union, tried to do socialism and all that sort of stuff. But like, when, the workers' systems failed and the Soviets failed and stuff like that to provide for what the market wanted, all these black markets opened up everywhere, so people could get their goods and get the stuff that they wanted to. Like this is, undoubted proof. Or proof beyond any reasonable doubt anyway, that socialism could never work because there are black markets in socialism, or, Soviet Union style communism, or whatever the hell you want to call it, really. Anti-capitalist society of some sort. There's black markets, so that means like it doesn't work. And then like, the free market is the only kind of way that you can, manage all of the needs, the endless and limitless needs of a consumer population. And so, like, I thought, let's go and look at the history of the free market and see if it's true. Let's look at origins because, like, it's usually like, let's just say that attempts to do socialism and communism in the 20th century are kind of the origins of those types of societies. So, like the USSR, China, what was going on in like Cuba, what was going on in Southeast Asia, like Vietnam, Cambodia. Like these are experiments with communism and socialism, and like they just don't work, as you can see. Um, but like you could look at that and say that like these experiments were at their very origin point. They were at their early stages. So what was capitalism like then at its early stages? Was it void of black markets? Was it a completely free market utopia? Was it any of these things? And like we are destined to find out today to not not exactly fight fire with fire, but like let's compare what a new mode of production looks like when like it's in its infancy. It's really starting to develop and take hold, but like it's on its first leg, so it's a bit wobbly, it's a bit shaky. And like, what does it look like? What type of dynamics are happening? What type of systems have they got in place? Is it squeaky clean, or is it a bit haphazard, or is it even worse than that? And I feel like I haven't watched these. There's a documentary that I particularly want to watch, but like I haven't watched these documentaries yet. But I have a feeling that it's going to be um, very difficult for us to fathom and us to watch um, as civilized people in the 21st century. But like we'll do our best, shall we? So look, I've got one person in the chat. Say hello. Sorry, not in the chat. Viewing. Say hello if you can. If you're just watching in the background because you're at work or something like that. Solidarity to you. And we will continue. So first of all, I guess what is important here is kind of a history of early capitalism. Ooh, hello. Beasts and gods. It is good to see you and have you here. Thank you for saying hello and making yourself known. I'm not sure if you got the introduction just then, but like we're going to be looking at the history or the origins kind of modern capitalism. So that's me. Well, yeah, like I said, we're going to be looking at the origins of modern capitalism. So like kind of pre the Industrial Revolution, but like maybe around the same time of it as it's kind of developing. Um, or taking hold. And we're going to look at how, like, they established markets back then, how they established the market culture, and what they did, and how they related to this idea of the free market, which is like, mythologized as like this best way of doing things, and there's just no other. But like, we're going to kind of dispel that myth this morning or today, sorry, about how, like, lots of things have shaky starts at their origin, and it takes a while for them to develop and take stride, and really, really come of age, let's say. And so first we're going to look at the East India Company, which was a private company, basically an organization that was licensed by, or got approval, I guess you would say, a charter from the royals. I'm pretty sure it was the Queen. I can't remember which Queen. Maybe Elizabeth, maybe Victoria. I'm not very down with my English history going back that far. But like from its inception, so the East India Company, just like a really quick, like kind of overview of what was happening. The Dutch were basically like just in control of like um, global trade, I guess you would say, or like Atlantic trade to a certain extent. They were like a dominant kind of trading power in Europe. Before them, the Portuguese had been like kind of all over the place. Oh, hello, hello, hello. Don't hide your face, mate. Um, yeah, be proud, Squeeb. It's good to see you. Yeah, so the East India Company were kind of like a evolution of different types of European trading organizations that had been commissioned by and like granted approval by like royals. Good advice on hiding faces. Ha! Ha! Yeah, I guess that is pretty rich coming from me. With that, I will end my live stream because I've just been completely shut down. And it was lovely seeing you all. I'll see you next week. Uh, uh, love it. All right. Well, where was I before I was rudely shut down and put in my place? No, no, talk about the Queen. All right. So I will. So yeah, the Portuguese, like they had an advantageous position kind of in Europe on that kind of peninsula. And then like, they were able to kind of, go around and have a look at like places, Africa, India, like all of those places. And they were able to establish kind of trade routes, connections wherever they went. Then the Dutch kind of followed suit. They would follow, that shape around the European coastline into Africa, into India, all that sort of stuff, into the east. And then the English got in on the game, and so the East India Company was like a bunch of British, I guess you would call them entrepreneurs. Like they were kind of like by today's standards, they'd be more like explorers and adventurers that had like large amounts of capital. Um, and so like they were much more risk taker um, capitalists than you would have in the modern sense, because everything's wrapped up nicely in insurance, and all the risk is taken out of it in terms of global shipping, that is. But like, yeah, there was a bunch of like, yeah, people that had money got together in England and they appealed to the Queen and were kind of like, look, we would like to have the rights to basically trade in East India, which is like basically, anything from India onwards, like all the way through Southeast Asia, and like across China and like all the way out to like the other side of the Americas. Not that they kind of really knew all of everything that was happening on like in the Pacific Ocean, but like they basically had they they appealed to get a license to trade for anything, yeah, off the east coast of Africa onwards. Like that whole area was like theirs to kind of rape and pillage, which they did. Traditional socio-economic relations, liberalism, as we understand it, is quite tied to the radical free market ideology. From the English, Marx or was it Lenin discussed the history of it? I think they both do. Marx does definitely in Capital, Volume 1. He goes extensively into the history of capitalism, like how we got to capitalism, kind of thing. Um, but like, you're right. Like liberalism came, I would say, as kind of like on the tail end of what the East India Company was doing. They were a little bit more like mercantilists and stuff like that. But like, let's just get a world map out here so I can actually speak to it. So you're not just listening to me ramble on. So you got some actual context. Had 4 people in the chat. We got 3. So if you haven't said hello and you want to, don't be shy. And don't be scared of hiding your face. We are non-judgmental around here, as Squeeb will attest to. Connection to industrialists and finances rising in power in the early 19th century. Anyway, yes. That's why I said like liberalism, like developed out of all of this stuff that was happening. It was the East India Company that, trailblazed the entire planet and opened it up to, I guess, the forces of the free market. And then the liberals came in and were like, oh, see how wonderful the free market is? Everyone should have it, like, kind of thing. And they brought the free market to the world on the back of the East India Company. So, like, let me just get a good... That one looks okay. Let's go with this one. Look at that, it's loading. Does anyone remember what it was like when you had a modem and like you used to connect to the internet and stuff like that? Wish I had that modem sound. Okay, so like what I'm talking about here is like the Dutch are kind of around here somewhere. You can see my cursor, right? Yeah. The Dutch are over here somewhere. The English are over here somewhere. Here are the Portuguese. And so like, yeah, when the Portuguese were doing it, they're going around the African coast. They're like cracking on with India, like, pretty good like system they had going there. And like, they developed trade extensively with the Indians. The Dutch did the same, like they went this way, but they went straight and like really far into, damn, that's really annoying. I have to change that so you can actually see what I'm talking about. Here we go. So the Dutch like went further. They went into Southeast Asia, and they went further. They went into Southeast Asia, and sort of set up a lot of trading posts like in the heart of Southeast Asia. Like, don't get me wrong, the Portuguese went right down as well, like Goa, and then the Malayan Peninsula and things like that. And then the English kind of, stepped the game up again, and like, they really took over India. Like it was hard for them at the beginning. They couldn't get a foothold in there. The Portuguese were there, the French were there, the Dutch were there. Everyone was there first, and like the Indians really didn't like the English at first, but like once they got a foothold, it was the, let's say, the tenacity of the East India Company that like just basically took over the entire subcontinent almost, and like they did it with some extreme brutality, and they did the same here in Southeast Asia. They were really, really brutal, and like they really conquered that area. But they opened it up to market forces. So like, the entire world was one big market because of like the practices of the East India Company. And like I was saying, they were kind of given a license by the Queen, and like they had to renew their license like every couple of years or something. But the East India Company like got so huge, like it was like its worth alone, its wealth or its value as a company alone, like was like two or three times the size of the English economy itself, at certain points. And like, it was like, it had massive reach, the East India Company. Like, the East India Company was like the reason for the Tea Party movement in like America, which led to, like the American Revolution. Like the Boston Tea Party was a result of them, because like the East India Company were like bringing their tea over from India and like kind of trying to dump it in America, and the Americans didn't want it because they had their own. And so like they kind of rebelled against the East India Company, not the English, the East India Company, and like threw all their tea into the ocean, and it started a whole chain of events that really changed like the course of modern history. So like the East India Company were massive, and they were a company. Okay, so like I said, like the English royals, with their own sovereignty, granted them basically trading rights for, like I said, everything pretty much, I think, like east of the eastern coast of Africa, basically. So like, you can have all of that stuff over there and do whatever you like. Like it was a license to not just trade. Like it's like a license, a military license. So like, set up armies, set up navies, take people captive, exploit lands and resources, do whatever you want. And like, and they did. They killed a lot of people and destroyed a lot of cultures. So anyway, we're gonna have a look at a documentary today, which I really want to watch, about the history of nutmeg, of all things, because like obviously the East India Company for a large part were dealing in like spice trade and stuff like that. Like spices were just hugely profitable, among many other goods and stuff like that. But yeah, spices hugely profitable back in continental Europe and in the British Isle. And so there was massive massive industry and profit to be made in that sector. And so nutmeg is just one of the spices, but like it's got a very interesting tale, and it's very kind of emblematic, or it's a good example, a really good example of what the hell was going on in this early free market kind of system, or what developed into the free market as we know it. And like it just really shows you how at the origin of a new mode of production, like how chaotic, destructive, and unstable things can be. And the people that are usually bringing that new mode of production to the world are absolutely ruthless and blood soaked. So yeah, let's have a look at that documentary now. It's a long one, so like I don't know if we're gonna get through all of it. I'm not gonna lie to you. But like we'll do our darndest, and we'll see how we go. Um, but like yeah, I've heard good things about this documentary, so I thought we'd give it a crack. And like so we have a little bit more kind of history as to like yeah, what was going on in the market world back when it was starting, which is always good. It's always good to have some context so you can one, understand things better, but two, call people's bullshit out when they try to tell you that like socialism or communism or some type of revolutionary movement is kind of just an unacceptable eventuality, or a plan to have, because like we've done revolutions and we've done socialism, communism before, and it ended in misery and death and destruction, and so like it shouldn't kind of ever be tried again. And it's just like, well, like if you look at the history of this type of stuff, that's exactly what has happened. And so it's not unusual for these things to have rocky beginnings and rocky starts. And so let's just take that into consideration, because these are kind of historical themes, which again I think is very important to have in your back pocket. So let's have a look. I might speed it up a little bit. If you don't like that it's sped up though, and you want to hear it at normal speed, just let me know. But like it might help us get through it, because it's a longie. It's a longie.
Known as an arrow. This is nutmeg, a spice that needs no introduction. You might find it sold in the shell like this, but more likely you're going to find the kernel that's inside of it. Or even more likely, you will see it sold as a powder. What you might not know is that nutmeg is actually a seed. And in nature, that seed is surrounded by a bright red
I did not know
covering
that.
known as an aril. The arils are actually dried to make a completely different spice called mace. Not to be confused with this kind of mace. Mace is not quite as well known as nutmeg is, but it is a common ingredient in a variety of different spice mixtures, including garam masala, ras el hanout, and curry powder.
Curry
But
powder.
it doesn't end there. There is actually a third product that comes from the nutmeg tree, nutmeg fruit. Worldwide, this is the least popular part of the three. However, in the areas that nutmeg trees grow, nutmeg fruit is arguably even more popular than the spices that lie inside of it. And there's one more layer, a layer that you cannot see, because as interesting as nutmeg may be as an ingredient, that's nothing compared to the surprising, and surprisingly dark, history of how it ended up in your cupboard. Nutmeg was literally worth its weight in gold. Yet despite of this, for a long time, the location of where this spice grew was a closely guarded secret.
I don't think that's an exaggeration either. Let's go. Hey, wings of cheese. When I discovered speeding up YouTube videos, I blessed Karl Marx's ghost. So awesome to hustle up some slow thinking and talking narrators. Yes. I actually discovered it because someone commented once on a video of mine. I did a music video once, and they were like, "Oh my god, you should listen to this at two and a half speed or something like that. It really changes the song." And I was like, "Holy crap! I didn't know you could do that." And so sometimes when I want to troll through something really fast to get the essence of what they're trying to say, then I'll use the speeds. I'll change speeds. Holy crap! Is that right? 7 people watching this at the moment. Well, if that's you and you're listening and you haven't actually clicked on this, say hi. And we're going through and discovering the origins of free market culture, which is basically kind of like the origins of the company. Specifically, we're looking at the East India Company and their monopoly on trade for basically 2/3 of the planet, and how they exploited indigenous populations to get spices and make an absolute killing. You can listen to people road rage on speed, on ×2 speed. It's pretty funny. I'm sure it is. Yeah. What up? Give up the rock. It's 4IS. He's in the house. Yes. We are looking at the history of free market culture, 4IS, and we're doing that through the lovely East India Company. Pete's Perspective. Hello, Pete's Perspective. Welcome to the chat. I'm not sure if you've heard what we're doing today, but let me know and I can explain it to you. But yeah, we're going to look at this documentary. I don't know, I could do either for years, even after I got premium to keep the child happy with the no ads feature. Yeah, I'm old. Look, I'm going to get myself premium one day. Once I hit a certain amount on Patreon and I can finally afford ye old premium, and then you guys will never have to watch ads ever again. I swear.
Today, I'll be going on a worldwide adventure to discover everything that I can about nutmeg. And in order to do this right, I am going to go to the top secret location of where nutmeg originated.
She would be sad. She would. But it's got to be done. Got to get rid of these Australian ads. 4AS. No, we're not going to follow him all the way to Indonesia or something like that.
This is the Newark Airport International Terminal. It's got the vibe of...
Yes, we are, apparently.
which is considered to be the worst airport in... It's not that bad, but to Malaysia. Yes, I'm going to Malaysia again. But you might wonder, is Malaysia where nutmeg is from originally? No, nutmeg is from a very remote part of the world, very difficult to get to, and honestly, at the time I film this, I am not entirely sure that I'm going to be able to get there. So to cover all my bases, I want to go to Malaysia first, and then head over to these remote islands. Nutmeg does not grow in a lot of places around the world. It's got to be in a very specific kind of area, and this is one place that you can go that you can get to without a whole lot of trouble. So, we're going there first.
Welcome. Thank God for the title, hey? Well, like, yeah, we're going to be looking at the history of, like, why a free market is not so free based on its origins. Like I was saying earlier, this is coming from one of my pet peeves when people, like, kind of go after the USSR and, like, you know, people that have experimented with socialism and stuff like that, and they're just like, oh, well, you know, they didn't work, those societies, because like they had black markets and like they controlled economies and like all this sort of stuff. And it's like, yeah, well, like if you look at the origin of the free market, did they have black markets? Did they completely control their economies? Did they have monopolies, all this type of stuff? Yes, they did. So the free market has very similar origins actually to, like, you know, socialist experiments of the 20th century, like in USSR, China, and other places. So, like, yeah, we're going to go through and bust some myths about the free market, or like kind of this idealistic vision of it just being like this place where everybody gets along and trades with each other, and there's absolutely no death and destruction, which I think we're going to find out there is. But yeah.
Nutmeg fruit, I went to an area where it grows, the island of Penang in western Malaysia.
Penang.
Nutmeg fruit isn't something you'll find everywhere throughout Malaysia. In fact, you won't even find it much in Penang. This fruit is used very locally, so in order to find it, I went to a nutmeg growing region. In the small town of Balik Pulau, nutmeg fruit and its products are for sale everywhere. I saw the candy.
So I'm just jumping through to a section that's called nutmeg. So why were spices so valuable? Hopefully this gives us, like, gets more to the point of what we want. Oh, that was pretty cool. I like that.
These days, you can get dozens of spices from all around the world at a dollar store. So it's hard to imagine that at one point in time, some of the seasonings that we use every day were literally worth their weight in gold.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Spices were once so valuable that they were often even used as currency. During the Roman Empire, it was common for workers to be paid in salt. The word salary actually comes from sal, the Latin word for salt.
Who knew that one already? Anyone? I knew that one. That's a good one.
In the 15th century, precious metals became so scarce in Europe that black peppercorns became a commonly accepted form of payment. The legal term peppercorn rent comes from this time as well. It means making an insubstantial payment as a formality. For instance, if your parents sell you their car for $1, they are charging you a peppercorn payment. Or your parents are really bad with money. Because of this, in the past, some official contracts would literally have the low cost of only one peppercorn listed as payment. Nutmeg and mace were even more valuable than pepper. To give an idea of just how valuable they were, here are some figures that I found. On an English price list from 1265, I found that 1 pound of mace was worth the price of not 1, not 2, but 3 sheep.
Whoa.
Another English price list from 1350 lists that 28 ounces of mace was worth an entire cow.
Whoa, that's
on a German
mental.
price list,
Like, cows are pretty important. Far out.
from 1393, 1 pound of nutmeg was worth a whopping 7 fat oxen.
No way. That's crazy. Yeah, new factoid. Anyone? Anyone? Like this is mental. But like spices like literally were like the commodities of like I guess the end or the latter part of the medieval period. Like massive. Like they were just the bee's knees. They were like oil today. So like I guess if you could put like kind of um a roadmap on like what were the most important resources or commodities that were being consumed and were just like absolutely valuable as hell. Like you could just say like the spices were like in this period um, were like just absolutely on top in terms of world trade. And then you had kind of like moving towards textiles. So then you had cotton for a long time. And then like, I guess, you would have had like a period where oil would have taken over. And like, I think we're in a new age, and you've probably heard me talk about this before. I think oil is no longer the main commodity to be traded. I think it's data in the 21st century. It's all about data today. I think Paul Cockshott did a video on the LTV and the spice trade in early capitalist trade. Um, didn't we used to use sticks with carvings in them too in the old days? Yeah, that's where stocks come from, apparently. So like a stock is like when you put like a notch on like a stick or something like that to represent like a deal between two people, and they like snap the stick in half, and there's notches on each side. And that like is supposed to kind of represent a credit system or a stock, apparently. Um, they probably thought spices had magical properties. They probably did. And like, if you were a smelly, like, person living in medieval times and like you had pretty kind of bland food from the British Isles or something like that, like, could you imagine smelling clove for the first time? Like, you probably would have hallucinated or something like that. You probably would have thought that it was something made by some divine power or the gods or something like that, if you believed in multiple gods at the time. Um, bring sticks back. Yeah, I know, right? How easy would everything work if we could just find sticks to match? It's kind of a bit like how Bitcoin works, right? Like you must have the chain and like the information sorted to be able to verify it. And like sticks work the same. Like if you snap the stick in a certain way, the only other way to complete that stock trade is to have the other half of the stick. Um, large stone plates, discs. The Scythians smoked weed, lol. Well, good on the Scythians, eh? I heard an interesting fact about like the origin of marijuana as well. Like it actually came from these bad boys here, or like animals like them. And they were like no, actually, I think there were goats. Actually, goats living on like a mountainous area in like modern day Kazakhstan or something like that. Like weed would grow on this mountainous area, like marijuana, and like they would eat the weed plant, and then the people that like would milk these goats like used to get like a little bit high or something like that, and then they figured out it was coming from this plant that the goats were eating, and then they started to cultivate the plant itself. Nutmeg is a deliriant. Deliriant? I don't know what that means. As delicious as nutmeg is, it would never be that valuable just because of the flavor. Ah, interesting. Interesting. Well, I don't know, man. If you lived in like plain old medieval Europe, with not much luxuries around, like salt was used like as a form of salary. Like people made payments in salt. Like this stuff was big. And like worth its weight in gold, I don't think is an understatement. Like I'm sure nutmeg was actually worth its weight in gold at some point, like literally. Of course, medieval idealists would try to deflect attention away from a materialist interpretation of the value of spices. Even the feudalists tried to deflect attention away from the LTV. In the old days, spices were pretty hot. They were hot, and literally is a type of hallucinogen. Ah, that induces delirium. Thank you, outspeaker. Thank you very much. I was wondering where we were going with that. So anyway, let this guy continue. The Weird Explorer, 414K subscribers. What a legend.
Not scrawny ones, fat ones. So why were spices so valuable? Do people really care so much about flavor that they'd be willing to spend
Well, here we go.
exorbitant amounts
They're
of
going to
money
answer your
just
question.
to season their food? Well, yeah, people who could afford spices used them for flavor, but there was more to it than that. In times of food scarcity, when food was rotting, spices would be used to cover up the bad taste. Fun fact, mulled wine was originally created in order to hide the taste of spoiled wine. Besides just hiding the spoiled flavor of food and drink, the antibacterial and insecticidal properties of some spices could actually help prevent spoiling. Owning and
makes
using
sense.
spices was a symbol of wealth. In some cultures, one's worth was actually determined by the amount of pepper that they owned. Imagine living in that world, having friends over, and then grinding a little pepper on their food. That was the ultimate subtle flex.
Yeah, I know,
Using
right?
spices was also fashionable. If that sounds hard to believe, just know that nutmeg is a key ingredient in pumpkin spice. Like it or not, that has been trending for centuries. Nutmeg in particular contains myristicin, and that was, and for some still is, used as an hallucinogenic.
Who called it?
Spices
Who
were
called
valued
that?
for their medicinal benefits, either
Someone called that already. Outspeaker, I think you were there. So drugs, medicine, preventing food from spoiling. Like, this is pretty important stuff. Like in a world where really you just are scraping by to maybe subsist, and like your mode of production exists just to ensure the reproduction of society, as opposed to like what we have now where it's just like producing shit en masse. This type of stuff would have been really fucking important. Like commodities that can do it all. They can add flavor to your food. They can stop things from going bad. They can be a symbol of wealth, fashionable. They help you hallucinate, and they have medicinal purposes. Nah, there are better and cheaper ways to preserve food.
consumed or mixed into salves and then applied externally. During a time when people didn't bathe all that often, spices were used as a perfume. Typically, they were put into small
That's what I said. Smelly Europeans would have loved this shit, I'm sure. What, a delirium as in induces delirium? What about selling? What a selling point. My mum got to be worth a lot then. My old reactionary mum.
containers called pomanders and then worn on the body. To go back to medicine for a minute, it was commonly believed that bad smells were the cause of many diseases. This is called the miasma theory. Because of this, the pleasant smell of spices were believed to provide protection. Another fun fact, for this reason, plague masks look the way that they do because the beak was actually stuffed with flowers and strong-smelling spices. While we're on the oh-so-pleasant topic of the plague, this horrible disease has even more to do with nutmeg. To learn more about it, let's take a quick detour to the Czech Republic.
Sorry, does anyone mind if I skip Prague? Anyone? I'm not going to go through the plague. I want to figure out what happened with nutmeg. As if no one has invented scented masks in modern times. Where nutmeg originated. Nutmeg soup review. The history of Portugal. I think this is where we get into colonialism, which is what I was talking about at the start. Far out. We got 10 people watching here. That's mental. Sorry, I've just never had this many people in the chat before. Or like watching a live stream. So introduce yourself if you haven't already. If you want to know what the hell we're doing, just let me know in the chat and I'll tell you. The plague has a lot to do with the development of capitalism though. Okay, all right, fair enough. All right, let's fight. Let's do the plague part then.
It's the morning in Prague right now. You can see behind me. And
So
I'm walking
loud.
over to the train station to go about an hour to the town of Kutná-Hora. So I'm in Kutna Hora. Gotta really be careful to get the letters on that in the right order. Kutna Hora. And I'm heading to the
Why?
Sedlec ossuary.
What's wrong with
One
that
of the
word?
biggest ossuaries in the world. There's supposed to be like 40,000 people that are all plague victims. Kostis, that means ossuary. Yeah, I guess this area was so popular for burials because supposedly they took dirt from the holy site Golgotha and they scattered it over the burial grounds here. So everybody wanted to be buried inside this area.
Sorry, can you not hear that properly? Just tell me again. I've turned it up a bit, but like it was blaring a second ago. Good content, man. Like this guys has great content. I wonder if this is real. Looks real. Far out.
During the 14th century, over a third of the population of Europe died from the plague.
Thank you.
This time appropriately became known as the Black Death. Some estimate the number of people who appropriately became known. A third of the population of Europe died from the plague.
I've heard that one
this
before.
Time
That's
appropriately
crazy.
became known as the Black Death. Some estimate the number of people who died to be as many as 200 million. The Sedlec ossuary gives a glimpse into this period of time. It was once a small burial site, but during the Black Death, so many bodies were brought there that it had to be expanded. But it still wasn't enough, and soon the site was overflowing with bodies. In the 16th century, a monk was tasked to make the Sedlec ossuary more presentable. The Sedlec ossuary is just one of many sites throughout the world that are filled with plague victims. These sites are often meant to act as a memento mori, a place to reflect on one's mortality. But in learning about history, sites like this can also help you see the mortality of others. It is easy to hear that thousands of people were killed by something, but it is another thing to see the evidence of that. Okay, so that was absolutely insane. It's just beyond words.
Yeah, and the Europeans are really morbid like that too. Like I went into the French catacombs and stuff like that. And like, you know, I thought it was going to be a pretty crazy experience regardless. But like you're just walking through this area that you can barely fit in as I guess a modern sized human. And like there's just like within arm's reach, just like skulls and bones and mostly skulls actually. I don't know what they did with the rest of them. But like, yeah, just everywhere around you and stuff like that. And it's just like the European people that I were with are just like, you know, just chilling like it's normal. And I was just like, we are surrounded by skulls. And so like, yeah, this type of stuff on display, it does, he's right, it does make you ponder a lot about mortality. I wonder where he's going with this.
There are so many people buried in there, or so many people, like, their skeletons arranged in there, that it's just, I can't even, like, really process it.
It is hard to process. I feel your dog.
The Black Death decimated Europe. People were desperate for something to save them from this horrible disease, and many believed that nutmeg was that cure. The plague was caused by Yersinia pestis, a bacteria that was carried by fleas. Did nutmeg actually cure the plague? No, but it might have helped in a small way. It does have an antibacterial property to it that theoretically could have helped prevent the spread of plague-causing bacteria. And nutmeg does contain a natural insecticide that theoretically could have helped repel fleas. So good news, right? No. Yes, the bacteria was being carried by fleas, but those fleas were being carried by rats. And those rats were carried by spice traders. Ironically, merchants that were believed to be bringing life-saving nutmeg across the globe in order to help people with the plague were inadvertently spreading the plague as they went.
Well. Here we go, hey? World trade, hey? And the free market, hey? Brought around plague rats and spread them around the globe. Well. The next time someone quotes, okay, the next time Somebody quotes to you the little black book of communism, and they just talk to you about like how destructive, you know, communism is and socialism and all these like scary radical leftist notions. Just remember that like free trade or the ideals of global trade, which gave you the basis for the capitalist mode of production, helped spread plague around the world and wiped out a third of Europe's population. There you go.
Whether or not nutmeg was helpful, trade was one of the main reasons why the Black Death killed so many people. Either way, there was a lot of demand for nutmeg, especially throughout Europe. Europeans wanted it, they wanted it badly, and spice traders knew that. So naturally, they greatly inflated the cost.
Well, that's new too, isn't it? Hey? People warping the cost of something, pretending like there's a scarcity issue so they can profit badly off people and their misery. Like, this is just inherent in the free market system, apparently.
You may wonder why Europeans didn't just go and get the spices themselves. They had boats. Well, here's the problem. The location of where nutmeg was originating from was a closely guarded secret among spice traders. It wasn't until the 16th century that the first European nation finally figured out where the nutmeg was coming from. And to find out more about how this happened, we are next going to go to the city of Malacca in Malaysia. I am in Malacca. This is a very popular tourist area here in Malaysia, and it is popular for a lot of reasons. There's a ton of historic buildings here, a lot of incredible food, a lot of shopping, a ton of museums. There's a lot of cool things to check out if you come to Malacca. There are communities here, several communities of Malay, Indian, Chinese, and Eurasian cultures. So it's a very diverse place. However, it actually used to be even more diverse.
I hope you're listening.
Believe it or not, in the 16th century, there were so many different cultures here that people say that over 84 languages were spoken here in Malacca. Nutmeg is not originally from Malaysia. However, here in Malacca, this area played a very important part in how nutmeg was going from where it originated to the rest of the world. This, everybody, is the Strait of Malacca, and this waterway was huge. Sand just blew in my throat. This waterway was incredibly important for trade because this waterway connected East Asia to the rest of the world. So all those spices, they were coming through this strait for centuries. This is how people were getting that oh so fashionable, oh so trendy, oh so plague-curing spice. It's coming from there. So far, I have not told you where nutmeg was coming from because I've been building suspense. Well, now is the time. I'm going to tell you where it's from. It's from over there, okay? It's from that side of the Strait of Malacca. So the nutmeg traders would come from there. They would go down the Strait of Malacca. And if they wanted to take their nutmeg to Europe, they would keep going, okay? But they didn't want to do that because that would take a really, really long time, okay? So they would hang a right and they would go down this waterway. This here is the Malacca River. And we're going to go there next.
Well, this is interesting. But like, I do want to get to the history part. So I'm going to skip a little bit now, unless anyone has some grave objections to that.
Good, it works.
So Banda is the area where nutmeg actually comes from. Like, let's have a look at where Banda is on a world map. Here, can you guys see that? There's a group of islands around here. So there's Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, there's the Northern Territory, Timor. There's the band of islands around here, the Banda Archipelago, and like this is where nutmeg comes from. It's a very, very small and chain of islands apparently, and it's a very hard place to get to, and it's a very hard spice to source, ye old nutmeg. So I'm assuming that's where he's going with this.
When the Portuguese first showed up on the shores of the Banda Islands, at first, the Bandanese people, they welcomed them. They were like, hey, traders, great, sure, we'll trade with you, we'll trade with anybody, of course, come on in. Very welcoming. But, as you would imagine, over time, the Portuguese started to meddle a little bit. They started messing with their trade. They didn't like that. So, whenever the Portuguese kind of like overstepped their bounds, the Bandanese fought them tooth and nail. There's reports of them fighting a lot through history. There's a report of them Portuguese being like, hey, you know, sign this paper, and the Bandanese like stealing their ships. You know, they were tough. They're tough people, so they did not want any of that. And because of that, there is no Portuguese fort here, except kind of. Where I am walking around right now is Fort Nassau. They only managed to get the foundation built. They only built part of it, and then the Bandanese made them stop. What I'm in right now is a fort that was created, but was created by colonists who came later, who I will get into later in the video. But it is interesting to note that the Portuguese, try as they might, they never managed to do what they really set out to do here. The Bandanese people wouldn't let them. Needless to say, things weren't going according to plan for the Portuguese. And besides the Bandanese being tough mothers, there were two even bigger reasons why Portugal was not able to gain control. First, one of Portugal's main strategies was to coerce whoever was in charge of a land to agree to their monopoly. Well, this didn't work for the Bandanese. They had no ruler. How their society worked is it was broken up into separate communities, each with a chief known as an orang kaya. Literally meaning rich man,
Wow.
The orang kaya were respected elders that had gained their status due to the amount of nutmeg that they grew. They held power and influence and were representatives for their domains. For important matters that would involve the Banda Islands as a whole, the orang kaya of different regions would meet with each other and come to an agreement. They looked
Wow.
out for the good of their community, and naturally, they did not all agree to Portugal's demands. Second of all, it's important to note that although Portugal was the first European nation to discover the Banda Islands, they weren't the first ones in the world. Banda had regular visitors from Java, China, Malaysia, the Middle East, and other Indonesian islands. Sometimes traders even settled in Banda and took local wives. Marrying between different trading communities was often used to establish bonds, so the Bandanese had business relationships throughout other parts of Asia. The Bandanese had a successful system, and the most essential part of it was trade. As mentioned, they didn't grow enough food for themselves, so they needed to trade in order to eat. Portugal may have managed to reduce the amount that the Bandanese traded with others, but they could not completely stop it. I'm so enamored by the mountain here, but I have to be very careful while I'm walking here at the fort because there's cows here. I've like very nearly stepped in cow poop like many times while walking through here. For about 100 years, the Portuguese and the Bandanese had a complicated relationship. In fact, while this was going on, Portugal was engaging in battle after battle after battle after battle throughout the world, and whenever there was a battle in the Maluku Islands, the Bandanese would support the other side. They would send warships with their people to support the efforts going against the Portuguese. Yeah, not a very healthy relationship. And towards the very end of the 16th century,
The Portuguese, they backed off. They left the Banda Islands.
When was that?
Of the
In
16th century, the Portuguese, they backed off. They left the Banda Islands. Why? Well, I'm not going to pretend like I know the full military history here. I'm not a historian, but I mean, kind of makes sense. Bandies did not want them there. That's a reason. Another reason, though, is that they, at this time, had been fighting the Dutch. And the Dutch were trying to also establish monopolies through the area. And that kind of scared them away too, I would imagine.
So like it's just a natural occurrence when it comes to Europeans and trading and all that sort of stuff to try and set up monopolies wherever you go. And like basically lay claim to entire swathes of an uncharted area or something like that to claim and call it your own, which is, you know, kind of a very capitalistic mindset. Like it's all about like, on the one hand, like free market competition, right? You have a competitive environment and then like people like earn their merits within that competitive environment. But like also in order to compete, you absolutely destroy your competitors. And that's how you actually dominate a market. That's actually how you reach profit. So there's like a real contradiction between actual competition, so being in a competitive environment, and absolutely destroying your competition, which like is just like capitalist mindset and free markets ideology kind of wrapped up in a nutshell there. This like unresolvable contradiction between like the need for a competitive environment to, you know, spur on innovation, creativity, and all that sort of stuff, and, you know, the merits of who's the best in that environment, and then like also cannibalizing the competition. So like the Europeans kind of have this streak in them, and like successive waves of Europeans did it differently. Like the Portuguese, like along the Malayan Peninsula in India and all that sort of stuff. Okay, they went around and they were trying to very much kind of dominate the trade in those areas, but like they were also very much kind of about integrating with populations to a certain extent. They would leave people behind, like what he's describing, to kind of, you know, mate with the locals and establish themselves in the community so they could come back as much as possible with as little friction as possible. The Dutch did that less so, and then the English just completely ignored those more finer relations, because like by the time they were coming in, their technology would have just allowed them to completely wipe out local populations. So like, you know, as the Europeans develop their war machines, they also get a little bit more aggressive with their free market principles. It's what an interesting correlation between those two things.
So, end of the 16th century, the Portuguese left, and that is when the Dutch showed up. That is also when things start to get a bit ugly. Good morning, everybody. It is breakfast time, and I have with me a canary pancake with nutmeg jam on it, and also nutmeg coffee. It's got the nutmeg seed in it, not the fruit, not the mace. That's a lot of nutmeg. That's a lot of nutmeg. Whoa, ho, ho, ho. That is a lot of nutmeg. That is actually a concerning amount of nutmeg. You know, like nutmeg contains a compound called myristicin, and myristicin is good for a few things. It's an insecticide, but it's also an hallucinogenic. So I think like if, you know, probably for someone my size, like one big seed of nutmeg is probably enough to have an effect on me. And I'd say that this cup of coffee has like half the seed in it. It is that strong. So.
Whoa, nutmeg in a syringe. I was thinking something along the lines, I'm going to my pantry, I'll be back, guys, I'm just getting the nutmeg.
1 cup, fine, but if I were to have a second cup, I might start seeing elephants or something. Honestly, I'm not like the biggest fan of the coffee throughout the area here. I'm being totally honest. Like what I say, I don't like it. But I like the nutmeg coffee more. You know, it's kind of like in the past when people would use spices in wine and stuff that they didn't like the taste of. It covers it up, it gives it a nice flavor, and I'm kind of feeling that experience right now. So the pancake. This pancake has canary nuts mixed into the batter, and then I put nutmeg jam on top of it. The canary nuts don't have a ton of flavor, but they do provide a nice little texture, and they provide butteriness. And the jam is excellent. I really like nutmeg jam. It's like apple pie and Coca-Cola. It's got a very interesting flavor to it, and it's kind of surprising that the jam is not away, or it's just used locally, popular on it. It makes no sense. And with nutmeg, I mean, it's perishable. You can't eat the fruit, but the jam, you've got no excuse. This is very, very good, and unfortunately, very difficult to find. When you come into the Band Islands, whether you're flying in, taking the boat in, swimming in, you will inevitably see the icon of the area here, Gunung Api, Banda's volcano. Gunung Api literally means volcano. If you Google that, several things will come up, but right now I am climbing Banda's Gunung Api. There are more active volcanoes. This is really hard. There are more active volcanoes here in Indonesia than anywhere else in the world. And this one is also active. Over the past 500 years, there are records of how often this volcano erupted. Once every 20 years, on average, it erupts. As I film this, it is 2024. The last time this volcano erupted was in 1988. Better walk gently. So one of my sources for this video was The Nutmeg's Curse by Amitav Ghosh, and what he pointed out, it's a very fun fact, is that volcanoes are very important in Indonesia. Culturally, they're very important. It was not just, you know, a mountain that is occasionally doing this scientific thing. People saw it as sacred. So when volcanoes erupted, especially when it's not like all the time, like every 20 years, it would have been seen as like a great sign, a great omen. Something really important has happened, or it's going to happen. Well, in 1599, this volcano erupted. Shortly after this volcano erupted, the Dutch appeared on the shore in the Banda Islands. Imagine everybody wondering, what does it mean? Probably people thought, maybe there's a connection here. Maybe this is what the volcano was telling us. Can't say for sure, but it was definitely a very important moment when the volcano erupted. And it was a very important moment shortly after when the Dutch showed up. So, what does it mean? So, the really tricky thing about climbing this volcano is this rock. It's real loose. Whoa, almost falling right there. Okay, so you gotta be very, very careful, especially if you're filming with one hand and trying to balance with the other. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna put this camera away.
So how did the foreign traders ruin the local economy first, before capitalism even got started in Malaysia to really do it? Them, but good. So how did it actually ruin the local economy? Well, it seems like trade was integrated heavily into their economies already, which was pretty kind of typical for people that lived around like modern day Indonesia and Malaysia and stuff like that. They were all kind of living like in these islands as like little trading posts, and it seemed like the locals were, I guess, very on top of their own trade relations. And I think it is probably that that actual independence or that level of autonomy that these people wanted that would have kind of, I guess, paved the way for their domination, or the justification for their domination in the eyes of European traders. Because, like, you know, you can't have a good, healthy trade route or empire going if you have people like basically wanting to negotiate on their own terms. So that's Krakatoa, I presume. Is there anything Marx didn't predict accurately? That's a good question, actually.
I'll see you at the top. Hey. Oh yeah, never been better. So I thought that I had it hard. This is a very difficult trek, and I've been like downing water like nobody's business, almost out. But it's Ramadan, so everybody here, you're not drinking water, right? You're doing this dry. You're a stronger man than me. I'm on my second bottle. Check this out.
Yes, it's a nice mountain. Got it. And it's an active volcano. Got it.
Create, but we're stopped by the band knees. That is right above my finger there. There's a little bit of wall left, but it's just ruins. So that ended up not being a spot where the Dutch really wanted to keep their fort. So they started there, they started building it, and then they ended up moving their fort to this impressive guy up there on the hill. So this was built on the hill, that way people would be able to see if ships were coming. Forts here in the Banda Islands were multi-purpose. They did a lot of things. They would protect people, they would be used as a vantage point to see if ships are coming, they would conduct business here. Spice-related business, I'm sure, happened at this fort. But another thing that's very important for the purposes of my video are this is where they would store the nutmeg. You know, nutmeg was worth a lot of money. They want to make sure it was safe, so they would keep it inside the walls of their fortresses. So I'm not sure for certain, but I think I found the nutmeg storage room for the main fort here in the Banda Islands, and I'm going to take you in there. It is pretty dank in here. So there's one room right here, one room right here. I can pretty much guarantee that this room is the storage room for nutmeg. No one has told me. However, when you go inside this room, I know there's nothing in here except cockroaches and mold, but this room smells like nutmeg strongly. It has a strong nutmeg scent. And I can just guarantee that at one point in history, maybe hundreds of years ago, there was a big mound of nutmeg right here, because I can still smell it. Just this room. When you go in this room here, I don't smell anything, just mold. When I go in here, ugh, this one smells kind of like pee. I think somebody's been peeing in here. But no, this room right here, I can still smell it. This here is a VOC symbol. Maybe a little hard to make out because it's original, but there's a V, an O, and a C. And this stands for the Dutch East India Company. When the VOC was formed, Portugal and the Netherlands were at war, or at least they were fighting a lot at this time. Portugal sanctioned the Netherlands from purchasing spices. So the VOC attempting to get a monopoly on spices was, to do two things. One, to regain this valuable commodity that they were no longer able to get from the Portuguese, and also to hit the Portuguese where it hurt. The Portuguese were under the orders of the king. They were following orders. They were doing what they needed to do. The Dutch East India Company, they basically were able to make their own decisions. They were given permission by the Dutch government to wage wars, colonize places. They were able to kill, enslave. They even had their own currency. They were able to do a lot with no need to ask the king for help. So because of that,
That's the difference between a company. And that's what I was talking about at the beginning. So these companies were set up. They basically appealed to the royals of their nation state, of their country, and got a license to basically operate and trade in a certain part of the known world. And this is what the Dutch did with their East India Company, and this is what the British did with their East India Company as well. They were a bunch of people with capital and investors, let's say, and they bought a fleet and a bunch of ships and armed those ships and sent them off, sent the fleet off and got them to go out and set up a base somewhere in Southeast Asia or East Asia, and were just you go for it and do whatever you want. you can, like he said, you can set up your own militaries there. So like they employed locals and like, you know, and mercenaries, and like they enslaved populations, they waged war on other nations. Like they did whatever they wanted to. They basically had free license to do whatever they wanted. But like the Portuguese, like I was saying before, like they were representatives of Portugal and the royal family and all that sort of stuff. So they traded, they were ruthless, but they did it in the name of like their king and country, etc., etc. But the companies, though, this is a different entity, and it is a legal entity that like is given like kind of the go ahead by the state of a particular nation, and it acts as a nation, almost as a massive organization, with its own autonomy. And so like this unit, this idea that an organization can act like an individual, almost can act like an entire sovereign nation, almost. This is where it really kind of comes to existence, or is perfected, I would say. And this is where kind of capitalism and this idea of free trade starts to really develop. And it's just funny because like once you get to the free trade kind of discussions and the capitalist kind of discussions of like, you know, the 1700s and the 1800s, so the 18th and the 19th century, like it's all about like, you know, freedom and equality and all that sort of stuff. These are the liberal ideals, but it's based in something that was happening a couple of hundred years before it, which is just like blood-soaked colonialist kind of yeah, destructive trade relations, like going in and kind of cutting off local communities and saying you can't trade with anyone else but us, and if you try anything, we'll wipe you out, like kind of thing. Or they just wiped them out anyway. I think it happened in Canada too for a while. Hudson Bay Company, I think. They got their model from the equestrian class of the old Roman Empire. That would probably be a major factor in why there's Maoists fighting in India, because their homeland was subjugated and the caste system. Yeah, they're all responses to the lovely and salient features of free trade and the capitalist system. The tax farmers, I mean, they were small middle-class private operations, either the Senate's permission to extract as much tax and slaves as they could. They were called publicani. Interesting.
They managed to get like a stranglehold in this area, and they made a lot of money. During the time that they were around, they made the equivalent of about 8 trillion, trillion with a T, US dollars, making them like the most successful company of all time by colonizing, by killing, by enslaving, by taking control of this very valuable commodity. They changed the world.
When the VOC showed up, the band
$8 trillion. That's a lot. That's like, obviously he's making that into 2024 comparative monetary terms there. But like, you know, $8 trillion. Like, let's just kind of like fact check that one for a second. I know I go to ChatGPT to fact check, and like, you know, if you guys want to do your own fact checking on that one, like by all means. I just heard a statistic that the Dutch East India Company made about $8 trillion worth of profits from the trade of nutmeg during its heyday. Full stop. One, can you clarify this statistic? And two, can you give me some way of conceptualizing $8 trillion worth of trade or profit? Thank you. is likely an exaggeration. Ha. Estimates suggest the VOC total value would have been around in today's terms, $7.9 trillion. Like, okay, it's pretty close to $8 trillion. Nutmeg was indeed highly valuable commodity for the VOC. It controlled much of the global nutmeg trade in the 17th century, often monopolizing production and driving up prices. However, attributing 8 trillion solely to nutmeg seems dubious. Nutmeg was part of the trade portfolio. Okay, so like one element, but a large element. But still, like, you know, whatever the fraction of $8 trillion, if it's a large part of their economic return, then that's still pretty big. It was a major part in their trade. Spices like cloves, pepper, cinnamon, along with textiles, tea, and precious metals. So. To grasp the scale of 8 trillion, consider these comparisons: time-based, stacked economy. $1 trillion exceeds the GDP of most countries. The GDP of Australia is 1.5 trillion. Only about 20 countries in the world have economies larger than 1 trillion. Okay, so that gives you some, if you're Australian anyway, that gives you some context for that one. I should have said Roman Republic, not Empire. It began under the Republic. Small societies bid and prepaid for the right to act as private reps of the Roman Senate as tax collectors and slave procurers. Very interesting. It's funny, Marx spends a bit of time in the Grundrisse talking about like this idea of like how antiquity dealt with like trade and like the money relation and stuff like that. And like he talks about it like having a market kind of economy to a certain extent, but not a developed market economy. That's how he makes the distinction between kind of like the trade in antiquity and like medieval times as opposed to the trade relations, the exchange relations that exist under capitalism, which is a developed kind of market economy as opposed to kind of a limited market economy. But like, you know, they were trialing all of these things that would end up becoming salient features or the main characteristics of a fully developed market economy, which like has the exchange value relations at the center of all of the workings of the mode of production, as opposed to like kind of the fringe elements of it. It's like the core of its nature. So let's go back to our mate here. And what happens when the Bandinese interact with the Dutch?
They changed the world.
When the VOC showed up, the Bandinese once again were welcoming. They believed that the Dutch were there to save them from the Portuguese. But then the Dutch began to show their real colors. They started to build a fort on top of the foundation that the Portuguese had already started. And when the Orang-Kaya protested, the Dutch ignored them. Tensions began to rise, and it was agreed that the Dutch and the Bandinese should have a meeting to discuss things. The Bandinese, as we've established, were tough mothers. So when the Dutch arrived to the meeting, the Bandinese ambushed them. They attacked and killed 46 members of the VOC and gave the rest of them a very clear message. Don't with us.
No
Of those
way.
who escaped
That's
their lives
hardcore.
was a man named Jan Pieterszoon Koen. If Koen was killed on that fateful day, the history of these islands would have been very different. Because soon after that ambush, he was appointed Governor General, and he wanted revenge. There is nothing in the world that gives one a better right than power. Despair not. Spare your enemies not, for God is with us.
Well. 8 trillion is the equivalent of $25,000 for every single current US citizen. That's a mind-boggling fact too, isn't it? All right. I will be right back. Give me a moment, give me a couple of minutes, and then we'll continue with this documentary because we're about to get into the dark part of building a society based on free market relations. All right, give me a second. I'll be back. All right, sorry. Thirsty as. All right. Where were we? Okay, so it sounds like we're getting to it feels like we're getting to the drama part of this, which is like he set up why nutmeg is so important, etc., how trade relations were dealt with up until the Dutch arrived. And look at this guy for a quote, hey? There's nothing in the world that gives one a better right than power. So this is the difference between, I guess, pre-capitalist societies and full-blown capitalist market relations is the idea of where power comes from. And so this guy just thinks that power in itself is a justification. Justification for what? I don't know. But it's just power for the sake of power. Despair not, spare your enemies not, for God is with us. And there is no better justification than saying that God's on your side. Oh, here it comes. He's going to grind some more nutmeg again.
The Portuguese failed to establish a nutmeg monopoly because it was impossible to do this with how the Bandanese society functioned. Kuhn saw the same problems, but he saw a solution. Eliminate that society and replace the Bandanese with slaves. The Dutch ordered the Bandanese to set fire to their homes and give themselves up peacefully. Some of them escaped, but most of them didn't believe what they were being told to do, and they ignored it.
The Dutch had hired a bunch of Japanese ronin, so mercenaries, samurai, basically. These Japanese ronin beheaded the Arankaya. They put their heads on spikes outside Fort Nassau to be a symbol of terror for the other inhabitants of the islands, and the bodies of the Arankaya were thrown down this well, which still exists today.
That well
Yes.
was not just any well, it's a sacred
Yes,
well.
sacred well.
And they were putting the bodies
Yes.
in there to be desecrating it.
This kind, yes.
Yeah, oh. So it's,
You know what happened after they put all the body in that one? The Banda had to get disaster after they killed Balinese people. Many happened, tsunami coming, earthquake, eruption, almost different every year. It seemed like the Banda Island crying.
Tragically, the Banda Islands, this once thriving area with over 15,000 people, was reduced down to only 1,000. The survivors of this were then enslaved and then either sold or forced to work in the nutmeg plantations. Since they were the only ones that knew how to farm nutmeg, they were forced to teach other slaves from other areas how to do it.
Well, they got dark real fast, didn't it? Far out. Oh, those cool, laid-back Dutch. Guess that's the origin of Mike Myers' she's gold member. Dude, it is pretty sinister. It is. And so, like, the Dutch were just basically like, okay, fine. We tried to set up a fort on your territory, but if you're going to come in and, like, force us out violently, then we're just going to come back and eradicate your culture. Whoa, whoa, whoa. All in the name of trade. All in the name of trade. In a European colonialist style, let's just recognize here. Because these Bandinese people, just like a lot of the inhabitants of this Southeast Asian region, were trading with each other for a long time. These people are Muslim. And so, like, it was the Muslims that were there before the Portuguese, trading in these areas and, like, slowly converting these people to Islam, setting up relations, you know, mixing with the locals, all that sort of stuff. The Chinese were in there. It seemed like a lot of different Asian cultures were in there, all trading with one another along this area. Like, you know, in a liberal style, like peaceably. Until you have kind of the Europeans coming in with their kind of superior technology and wiping them out. But, like, you know, not just superior technology by the sounds of it. Like, they hired Japanese warriors or mercenaries to come in and do their dirty work for them. It's very interesting how, you know, money talks, eh? Eh? You get other people to wipe out your enemies for you when you're on the other side of the world and you're acting as a company, and, like, your real power, as this guy has said, your power is a right. No, but your power comes from your ability to exchange with others and use exchange values. So some type of money form to get those people to do your bidding. So this is definitely exemplifying the capitalist mode, the free market ethic, which is like, you know, you can solve all of your problems with the money form. If you can't wipe out the Bandinese and subjugate them, pay someone and get them to do it for you. That's a very kind of free market ideological view of things. So yeah, intense.
I am on a speedboat right now, and I am heading to that island. That island is Rune. It is a inhabited island. It is only about 1.5 miles at its longest point. This is a small island, but it is a very important island. Okay, I'm going back in the cabin now. I made it! This is the island of Rune, and the island of Rune is incredibly significant in history because this was an English settlement. See, the Dutch, they had control of all the islands here except for this one. In 1603, the inhabitants of Rune made an agreement with Britain. They said, we will swear allegiance to the crown. We will allow you to settle here. That's fine. You can have nutmeg, sure. Just keep the Dutch away from us. So the English agreed, and now they had access to an island with nutmeg. Rune is small, but it produces a lot of nutmeg, so this was actually fairly significant. So Britain now has a source of nutmeg. And the Dutch were not happy about that. They wanted a monopoly. They wanted full control of all the nutmeg. So they fought the English.
Can we just say, again, this is like it sounds like, if you've just joined or if you're not really across what's happening here, it sounds like it's more the English versus the Dutch, but it's like the English company versus the Dutch company. That's the real kicker here is that these are companies that are like, representing the English people or the Dutch people or something like that, or these cultures. They are companies acting in the interests of private individuals, not in the interests of a sovereign nation or a group of royals that are supposed to represent their citizenry or something like that. Fuck the citizenry. This is about business.
For decades. There's constant fighting over this island. Things came to an agreement because in 1667, these two nations signed a treaty. In this agreement, England agreed to give this island, the island of Roon, that I am standing on right now, all 1.5 miles of it, they agreed to give this island to the Dutch in exchange for an island that the Dutch had just acquired in the Americas. So the island that the Dutch offered didn't have any nutmeg on it, but it was bigger. It was about 13 miles long. And they were calling this island New Amsterdam. And when the English took New Amsterdam, they decided to change the name to something that was a little bit closer to where they came from. They changed it to New York. So yes, about 350 years ago in some...
Isn't that a mad fact? Here's some more factoids for you, audience. That like they traded New Amsterdam for this little nutmeg island here to get themselves New York. Basically the capital of the citadel of modern capitalism, the Americas. Oh, sorry, North America, or more specifically, the US of A. That's really interesting. I like that fact. That like even New York itself is the settlement of, by extension, a business deal between like a Dutch trading company and an English trading company, where one person wanted a monopoly on nutmeg supply to Europe and the other wanted to basically solidify their dominance on the North American continent. That's a hectic fact. Yes, Squeeb, believe it. Wow.
Change, this island was exchanged for Manhattan, where I'm from. I mean, I'm from New York, I'm from Queens, but close enough. And it is just wild to imagine that this exchange happened. And I can't help but wonder the parallel universe that exists where that exchange did not happen. What would Manhattan look like if the Dutch owned it? Instead of pretzels on the street, would there be stroopwafels? I don't know. But it's like amazing to think that such a big change happened, and it's all because of nutmeg. The English, they still had a bone to pick with the Dutch, okay? So during the Napoleonic War, England managed to briefly gain control of the Band Islands, okay? So this is the 18th century. There's fighting, there's stuff, things happen, battles, wars, whatever. We're gonna kind of fast forward through that and go to a treaty being signed. So England gave the Band Islands back to the Dutch, okay? So Dutch had it, English had it, Dutch has it again. England's like, oh, okay, bye. Enjoy your islands. But they had an ace up their sleeve. They took thousands of nutmeg seedlings on their boats and they brought them to other colonies that they had. They brought nutmeg to Grenada, Sri Lanka, and Malaysia. The reason why nutmeg is in Penang, where I started this adventure, is because of that. Because Britain played a trick on the Dutch. After this happened, nutmeg was now much easier to access. It was being grown in several places, not just here. Not just...
Like, I know that seems like rather logical. Like, why wouldn't you have just done that like a couple of 100 years beforehand, right? Like, it's just like, okay, these people have a dominance, the Bandanese. Then, like, why not just undercut them and like just take the plant itself and grow it somewhere else? I know like some plants are obviously very specific and they're hard to grow outside of their local conditions and stuff like that. But like, that's a pretty typical kind of play in the capitalist playbook. Like, I know that sounds like really logical right now, but like for us living here, yeah, it's worth more not to undercut it if you have a monopoly, like kind of thing. So it's only grown like in one place and stuff like that. So it's incredibly rare, but like someone was bound to do it. Like, and like I said, like while that sounds like an incredibly kind of typical thing to do, like nowadays, it's just like if you can't get access to a market, then like you kind of just grow it yourself. But like this is part of the ideology that comes out of like a capitalist mode of thinking as well, or the thinking of a company, which is like you start to kind of look at the world through a different lens. It's not like geographical areas that have their own unique kind of assets and traits that need to be found only on those locations. You start to broaden up markets and you open them up, or if you cannot open up those areas, those traits to the world by accessing them directly, you take a piece of that and you take it back with you. So I'm surprised actually it took this long, really, for someone to kind of graft a plant or take the seedlings off the islands and start developing it themselves. Because like, if it just needs some type of tropic condition to thrive, then like, yes, apart from just monopolizing an industry, like taking it out and basically turning it into an agricultural market in and of itself, is a very, very typical play of capitalist relations. Like we have now like fruits and vegetables and agricultural produce that is grown and livestock that is taken around the world and is like completely detached and alienated from like its point of origin. That's just normal for us living in an advanced capitalist economy. It's very, very typical. And like for this guy to say it like this, it's just like, oh, well, and they just took the seedlings off. It kind of like appears to you at one point, it's like, well, that seems logical. Why the hell didn't they just do it? Why didn't they just do something like that earlier, which is what we do today when we have a shortage of something, or if we have access to something, and we want to cut out the fact that there's problems in the supply chain or problems in the distribution. We figure out a way, or capitalists will figure out a way to bring that closer to the home market, or closer to where it can, like their profits can be realized much easier. Same concept around things as like, why not make and sell more houses? Or also remember their market, quote unquote, was transferring it between nations more than growing, as that's the profit in trading to nations over selling locally. Yes, but this is what I'm saying. Like, it's the capitalist way to kind of not just trade with rare commodities, but like also get involved in the production of rare commodities. And if they're too rare and you can't really profit off them entirely, then you go and you produce them yourself, and you figure out a way to do that en masse, and like you mass produce something, and then you get to control the supply of it and make it a rare commodity. And now we have what we have now, which is when we saw what this guy did at the beginning of the show. Like, you can open your cupboard and like you can have nutmeg in there that like, you bought 10 years ago and you've only used a few times or something like that. And you literally bought it for like a couple of dollars, whereas it used to be basically worth its weight in gold as a commodity. But now, because of the productive relations in capitalism, which, like I said, it just seems logical to us that this is what is done, but it's not logical in a historical sense, because people didn't like kind of look at commodities in that way until they did. And like, it just becomes the norm thing. If it's like in a restricted location, then you figure out a way to mass produce it somewhere else. And like that type of pattern has been repeated like all over the world. Like, they say that like potatoes save the world kind of thing. Well, like, potatoes apparently from like South America or something like that. Like, they are not native at all to the types of climates that people find them in now. They're just a very hardy plant, and when they figured out a way to get them over, they basically changed the world and allowed kind of capitalist societies to develop, because they were able to feed their industrial working populations and their working classes en masse with this potato. Don't also confuse in consumerism. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by in consumerism, maybe with consumerism, but consumerism is just another word for capitalism. We don't value the old things in the spice cupboard due to consumerism. Well, like, yes, and I would say like due to like the fact that the productive capacity when it comes to spices now is so low cost that it's next to nothing in terms of why we don't put any value on it. Because like those things really aren't, and this is a feature of capitalism as well. Like as the productive forces get better and better, like things get less and less in terms of the cost of producing them. That's not a bad thing either. Like if things get closer and closer to zero cost in terms of production, like you really have to argue whether or not they should be on the market at all, and whether we can just produce enough for everyone. Buy new over holding a value. But like, yeah, this is an argument for like, you know, a post-capitalist kind of society. Is like if we can produce things next to zero cost, which is I think the story of the spice trade, once so valuable, like the most important commodities on earth, now so common that they just gather in the back of your pantry. It just shows you how the productive forces really work. And I just find it really surprising how long it took them to kind of realize that they just needed to apply the production of this commodity nutmeg somewhere else. I get it. I understand that, like, you know, keeping it in one place means that the scarcity effect takes hold. But like, it is interesting how long it took them to come to that conclusion. Also, the story of AI. What will people do for jobs, spend money on when production has been replaced? Well, production itself won't be replaced, but I think what we're talking about is the human element in production. Well, like there's certain things that I don't think AI is going to take over like anytime soon, like maybe in 100 years time or something like that. But like AI like is going to do some incredible things over the next 20 to 50 years. But like there's always going to be a lot of like human relation style work. Like I said, work that involves a lot of human interaction, that like people are gonna still be needed for in terms of jobs and all that sort of stuff. The question is whether those things need to be jobs or they can just be done outside of an exchange system, like outside of the market and stuff like that. That is the ultimate question I find in like kind of predicting what's going to happen in the future. All right, let's continue to see what happens.
Just in the Band Islands. And because of that, the monopoly that the Dutch had crumbled. It fell apart. The value of nutmeg dropped significantly. And now it was over.
Had to dip in and out of the stream, but it's been interesting. Are we going over the recent book that you've been reading? Well, like we're just going over like kind of general capitalists and production features and stuff like that. Me and Squeeb were just discussing like why like they didn't earlier, like people like the English or the Dutch even, or even the Portuguese, earlier did they not just take the plants off this island, of this band of islands, and just try to reproduce it somewhere else? And so we're talking about like, you know, artificially creating scarcity in a market, as opposed to just allowing productive forces to just go nuts and like mass producing something. And then the effect of mass production, which is like changing the cost of things and making it like almost zero cost. And then he's just said like, you know, once the English took nutmeg off this island and took it to other places where it could be mass produced, like nutmeg just reduced ridiculously and bottomed out in terms of its cost. There are new names here, and you know what? Before I ask, I have not done a plug, like really stupidly. I haven't done a plug at all, actually. Okay, so for all those people that are like new here, and have been like in and out of the conversation, I don't know if this is the right time to do it. I should have done it earlier, but like, please come and join us. One, please subscribe for more. Two, come and join us on Discord. We have these types of conversations over there, but like we can do it at any time because it's not a live stream. So So like I'm just gonna put in the invite for our Discord server, so you can go and join the chat if you would like. And then I'm also going to plug my Patreon. So if you are interested in getting notifications all the time, you can actually do that via signing up to Patreon and just becoming a member for free. So let me just get the link out. So copy. Okay, where's the chat? So here's the link to the Discord. Go and join the Discord. And here's the link to my Patreon. Please go over and sign up on Patreon, become a member, do it for free. You don't have to like make any financial commitments. It's just so like I can't get notifications through YouTube. It's just not how the algorithm works. It's kind of tests things out before it sends notifications to people. So like I can get notifications through to you via Patreon, but if you can support financially, I would really, really appreciate that. It helps me making this content, and it will help me get rid of YouTube Premium, which is the ultimate goal for 2025. So yeah, Reality Pixel Media, Pete's Perspective. I know you've been chatting. I haven't seen you in here before. If you guys, go over, join the Discord, join the Patreon, and let us continue with le documentaire. Also, money now versus money later is an economic thing. So could be an extract money now over invest. Extract money now over invest. Yeah, it's a good point. It's a very good point. And as these markets develop and stuff like that, like you change your decisions on, whether you just extract, which Marx would refer to as primitive accumulation, where you'd go in and dispose a local population of their resources, as opposed to investing like in production, as you were saying. I think that's a good point, Squid. Famous Captain Bligh was actually trying to do that with breadfruit in 1789 when the mutiny, transplanting it to a different colony. They were doing that, however, as cheap fodder for their slaves. Oof. Yeah, slavery and capitalism go hand in hand. It's really funny, right? Because capitalism is based on the idea of wage labor, but like slavery definitely seeps into the capitalist mode of production, because of the wage labor or the labor to capital relation. And really competes with the idea of someone exchanging their labor power for money in a free market system. And so like capitalism uses or employs, or capitalists, let's say, employ slavery throughout the capitalist system in order to kind of get around labor costs in a certain way, like production costs, sorry, in a certain way. But like it only seems to really happen in like colonial areas, because like people in the mainland don't want to accept that. They don't want to accept that style of living. The idea of moving plants that were important economically had occurred to them. Yeah, the British seem to take it to the next level, then, don't they?
This is probably a good time to mention that the external microphone for my camera gave out during my last couple of days in the Banda Islands. I have no idea how that could have happened. Luckily, the audio would go in and out, so I managed to capture a few moments on my last couple of days, including this one.
Wants a little human company. So yeah, every evening I come down here, I sit in the square, and just kind of like watch life go by. It's Ramadan, and I believe around this time is when fasting ends, so people are like kind of coming to life. It's usually my favorite part of a trip. It's not like climbing volcanoes, it's just finding a peaceful place to like hang out, have a drink, watch life go by, and this has been my place for that, and I've been coming here every night, and it's nice. Yeah, just kind of a moment to reflect back on this trip, and it has been an incredible trip. The Banda Islands are very difficult to get to. But absolutely worth it. Absolutely worth it. I kind of like that it's hard to get to. It makes it a little bit more special. There's really like not a lot of people around, locals and tourists alike. Very chill place, and I've been really enjoying it.
Oh, I'm sorry to wake you. You're very comfortable. Okay, I'll let you sleep.
You really want some treats. Okay, I got you. Good? You poor little thing. Here, have some more. Enjoy. I am in Jakarta right now, and come with me. I'm gonna take you somewhere cool. The history of Jakarta is intricately tied to the history of the spice trade, okay? Because this was a hotspot for all those European powers that were coming over here. And we're gonna do like a nutshell version of this to like my basic understanding of it, okay? It goes back to the Portuguese, okay? After the Portuguese seized Malacca, way back then, and they started going on expeditions to try to find out where the spices were, they came here. They came to Jakarta, they established a port, they established a presence, they were there, and then they were kicked out. Fast forward a bit to the Dutch, okay? The Dutch, as I said before, they went to the shores of the Banda Islands in 1599. Just before that, they came here to Jakarta. On their heels were the British. The British and them were not getting along. However, they both wanted a monopoly on spices, and they saw this as a strategic area. So they both set up shop here. Just imagine, like that would have been a very awkward period of time, I'm sure. But not for long, because eventually the Dutch kicked the British out. Maybe like the British ate some of the cold pizza from the Dutch's fridge or something. I don't know. There's a weird roommate situation going on. And eventually the British, they left. They left. The Dutch seized the area. They built a big wall. That wall. This is all Koen, by the way. The same guy who ordered to kill all the Bandanese. This is all his doing, okay? He seized Jakarta, changed its name to Batavia, and they put this big wall around it. The majority of the city wall was knocked down, but this was, at one time, a big wall that would have surrounded the entire city. The Dutch East India Company fell apart. It fell apart in 1799, something like that. But the Netherlands still has all these colonies, okay? Just because the Dutch East India Company left didn't mean that the Netherlands also left. They still had the Banda Islands as a colony. They still had Jakarta, or Batavia, I'm sorry, as a colony. So why did they leave? Okay, so fast forward again now to like the 1940s. The value of spices is still not great. They're not making a whole lot of money from these colonies anymore. Also, the economy in the Netherlands itself, not a colony, but just the Netherlands, was not doing so hot either. And then World War II. World War II happened, okay? We're talking 1940s. In 1942, the Japanese came to Jakarta, or Batavia, I'm sorry. Japanese come over here, they kick the Dutch out, and that pretty much ends it. That pretty much like is the death nail to the colonialism in this area by the Dutch. And then when World War II ended, the power was given to Indonesia. And by the way, like this place is, no one comes here. No one comes here. All around this area is just like parking for trucks.
I never get why colonialists wore those ugly things around their necks. It's like peacocking, I guess. It's a display. It's a display of brilliance. Just like displaying your wealth or something like that. Makes you look bigger, more attractive to the opposite sex.
But it's really cool, and it's within walking distance of the upkept colonial area, the Dutch Square.
So now, all the nutmeg plantation, the Bandanese people, they're running themselves. That's why you can see right now, Banda people, they get more free and more happy. And every island you can see they have a nice house, a concrete house, they have a television, good tile, washing machine, IC condition and everything. Yeah. It seems like we're back again before the colonialism came in Banda.
I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Although I've been telling this story as if I've been going from place to place, in order to make this video, I actually went to Southeast Asia twice. You may have noticed that in some parts I'm wearing glasses and some I'm not. Well, that's because between these two trips, I got LASIK eye surgery. On the first trip, I only went to Penang in order to visit the nutmeg farm. That was going to be it, but then when I got home from that trip, I started researching the history of nutmeg in order to give some fun facts about why it grows in Penang. And instead, I was disturbed by what I found out. What happened in the Banda Islands was terrible, but that wasn't the part that disturbed me. It was the casualness about how this tragedy was being told. This history is all too often told from the perspective of the colonists, and in this case, that history was summed up with a wave of the hand. They were killed, the Dutch were victorious, and now we have nutmeg. This fact was not fun at all. Going to places with a dark history can help you feel the weight of what actually happened. So that's why I went to Southeast Asia for a second time. I wanted to try and understand what really happened there 400 years ago. And by going there, I found out that those history books were out of date. Maybe the VOC got what they wanted at the time, but in the long run, they are the ones who left.
Seems like bringing statues down is actually quite a monumental occasion and really, takes place a lot throughout history. It's funny because, certain people take quite offense to removing a statue, like it's the first time it's ever happened in history, and it only has significance for them.
And although the colonist leaders were once seen as heroes in their home countries, today many people are seeing them as the monsters that they actually were. The people who live in the Banda Islands are different now. They are the descendants of the slaves that were brought in to work in the nutmeg plantations. They come from many different backgrounds, but today they proudly call themselves Bandanese. And once again, the nutmeg trade is good to them. So why do I still have a bad taste in my mouth? No matter how much nutmeg I use, it's not enough to cover it up. Because nutmeg wasn't the only thing that was stolen by the colonists. In the Banda Islands, the language and traditions of the original people has been lost. I think I have something that might help though. I learned a lot by going to the Banda Islands. And out of everything I learned...
Thanks, Squib. Appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Have learned a few new factoids today, haven't we? I like that New York one. That was interesting. Enjoy.
I finally have a fun fact to share with you. Something that's not usually mentioned. Just how fun is this fact? Well...
Here we go again. Third time's the charm. Well, everybody, I am on another boat. This time, I'm heading to Quai Bazaar. That's right behind me there. So Quai Bazaar is a very special place because, in 1621, when the Dutch attacked the Bandanese people, a lot of them escaped. Quai Bazaar today has the largest population of the original Bandanese still today. They're still around. I've seen towns that have cats everywhere or dogs everywhere. Here, there are goats. Nice jump.
The Quai Islands are about 200 miles away from the Banda Islands. The most visited is Quai Kachil, which is growing in popularity as a beach getaway for tourists. Quai Bazaar, however, receives very few visitors. It is home to roughly 40,000 people, and of that population, there are around 4,000 people whose ancestors originally came from the Banda Islands. They live in two regions that have names that reflect back to that history, Banda Alat and Banda Eli. However, the communities here do not call themselves Bandanese. They are the Wandan, named for their ancestors' original name for the Banda Islands.
Okay. I think I will have to meet somebody very important.
This is called Rumaseng.
Rumasai.
Yeah, Rumaseng.
What does that mean?
Rumaseng is like an old house. You see the sign?
Yes.
It's like sign of customs.
American Wandan Elat, at Nalang Amar. Yoka nalam sain be.
Say Jared.
Jared.
Jadi, kamu malah ngawai muna sa. Dari sana datang bikin apa?
I'm here to learn about the original Bandanese people and what their life is like today.
Ak nalang Abdullah Suat.
In K-Besar, there are three main languages that are spoken: Indonesian, K'ese, and Bandanese. And many of the Wandan people speak all three. Bandanese is especially important to them. It is used for official meetings and also functions as a social and ethnic boundary between their villages and others. This separation has allowed the language to survive despite them being a minority group on the island. Wandan people escaped to other areas too, but in those areas this social boundary wasn't established, so the language and customs there have been lost. Families may remember and pass down that heritage, but they have otherwise integrated into the larger community. My new friend Wasna, for instance, her family is a descendant of the Banda Islands, but her ancestors escaped to Saram.
My grandfathers will tell us about the story. So he was like, you know what, from long time ago, your grandparents ran away from Bandanera because of those coming and then destroyed our village, our island, and then we have to escape from them. My grandparents have a lot of daughters. They are beautiful daughters. So he spread the kids, her daughter, to escape from the Deutsch. That's a lesson to know our identity, our culture, our ethnic, and the reason why we're here. The historical is the big lessons, the big experience that we didn't see it, but we can take that from our mothers or maybe our parents' story, and we save that in our memory to share that there are kids. So reminding them too. And maybe too more respectful for the spices, because the spices destroy our country.
To this day, the Wandan people are known for being merchants and craftsmen. Banda Eli is especially well known for its traditional crafts, so I went there next to see if I can find any.
There's no tenders here. You gotta walk through the stones in order to get on this little boat. Jeez. At least I'm not the only one nearly falling. Ready? Yeah. How long of a ride is this? 1 hour, 1 hour and a half, 2 hours, maybe 3? No, you don't know. Okay. We'll find out. This episode is not sponsored by Dramamine, but I kind of wish it was.
We could only imagine what it's like for your home village to be destroyed by an empire. Yeah, I was just thinking about that. But like having the what's the word? Like the foresight, just to be like, you know what? Let's just get out of here. Like abandoning your ancestral lands and just be like, let's just get out of here right now while we still have a chance, and then you can survive somewhere else. It's a ballsy move, and like they must have been watching what the Dutch, the Europeans were capable of as they were coming through Southeast Asia. They must have heard reports from other locals, other people that they were trading with and all that sort of stuff. They're like, these people can wipe you out. They are dangerous. And like, they must have had a contingency plan. Like when the Dutch came in and like made some kind of give them ultimatums or something, they were like, let's get out of here. And like, we will come back when we need to, or we'll just set up shop somewhere else. But like, look at the look of these people as well. They're not really like just Southeast Asian in the traditional sense. They don't look particularly Indonesian either. They're kind of they look like a bit of a mix between Papua New Guineans and Indonesians and Southeast Asians and stuff like that. Very interesting cultural milieu. Yeah.
Can't say it wasn't a slice of heaven. All right. Banda Eli is the largest community of the Wandan people. There are several different villages that comprise this area. I was just admiring the owner of this house's basket here. It's a traditional basket that the Wandan people use. And she said, like, oh, you can buy them up here. This is the basket explorer today. basket update. We did not see any for sale. All those shops are closed because it's too early. But we're waiting for the boat here. And Dino, my guide here, he asked an older lady if she knew if there's anywhere close by we can get one. And she said, I have one. And she walked away to go and get it. So I might be buying hers. Oh, beautiful. Word has gotten out. There's an active buyer in the neighborhood. So a few more people have come by with handicrafts from the area here. This is a pot that is used for water. What would you like other people to know about the Wandan people today?
Pada zaman orang Jogja datang batas saya punya bapak dan mama itu orang Wandan itu masih dulu dalam bikin bentuk suram belangan dari tanah liat itu. Bahwa itu tandanya Wandan masih ada.
This was used for collecting nutmeg. The strap here actually goes on your head. So you use the strength of your neck to hold up the basket and put it in. This one is very, very small, so this would be one that like a child would use. And here are a couple of bracelets. These bracelets, you find them throughout the K Islands. My guide here, Tino, he said that they have them in his village, but not with this insignia on it. This symboling here is specific to the area.
Things aren't just made for their community, but are also traded with other islands. I was told that these earrings here were made specifically for weddings in the Tanimbar Islands, which are over 100 miles away. The political system for the Wandan is different now. There are still Arangkaya, however, this position today doesn't mean what it used to. Instead, today matters are settled by a village chief.
Nama saya Hakim Rahwarin, kepala desa di desa atau di Uhui Tuburlai. Ya, saya di sini memimpin 520 jiwa. Kami bagian daripada masyarakat Wandan atau masyarakat Banda Ili. Nah, semua berasal dari Banda Naira dan alhamdulillah kami bisa hidup berbaur dengan masyarakat DKI sudah hampir 400 tahun. Kami hidup sebagaimana layaknya masyarakat di Maluku Tenggara, hidup saling membaur, kemudian saling berpartisipasi dalam pembangunan dan kekeluargaan.
There are also kings who represent several groups of villages.
Nama saya dari Latar, anak terutama dari almarhum Haji Langwar Latar.
He's the king of this area?
Yes.
I'm going to be honest, my visit to K Basar was not what I thought it would be. I was expecting to just get a few recordings of the original Bandanese language and end this story on a positive note. That's not what happened. I got that recording, but I found out the Bandanese language is endangered.
Maksudnya bicara dengan anak-anak di rumah dong pakai bahasa Elat juga.
Iya.
Atau cuma pakai bahasa hari-hari. Oh, jadi anak-anak dong saya pakai bahasa Elat. Boleh begitu, Bang. Harus kebiasaan anak pakai bahasa Elat sampai kuliah.
Kids these days don't speak the
They
mother
don't
language.
speak mother language. They get it, they understand the meaning, but they didn't speak mother language.
Does his children speak the mother tongue?
Karena saya anak-anak sudah anak campuran, jadi jarang baru dia pakai bahasa Banda karena mamanya dari Jawa. Maka diprediksi seperti itu. Karena dalam hal perkawinan pencampuran itu.
Kita mengkhawatirkan bahasa ini akan hilang. Untuk itu tahun 2022 kemarin dari kantor bahasa Provinsi Maluku melakukan kegiatan revitalisasi bahasa Wandan. Di sini dalam rangka untuk bagaimana bisa menyelamatkan generasi dari bahasa ini jangan sampai kemudian dia
And those cultural practices that I mentioned, they're threatened as well.
That's very
Bahwa
interesting.
itu tandanya Wandan masih ada. Budaya itu telah punah karena dengan adanya perkembangan zaman modern, lalu budaya itu udah lepas.
I wanted to show that this dark history is a thing of the past. And although some people that I spoke to saw it that way, others didn't. On more than one occasion, I would ask a simple question, like, what is your name? Only to be taken aback by an impassioned response that needed no translation.
So would he mind first introducing himself in the original language?
Aknalan jajali. Mau famralet. Kaya ho karena ngondom. Akasalnya pelorum.
The culture of the Wandan people is very important to them, and despite all odds, they have managed to keep that culture alive. But some of them are upset, and they feel that the Indonesian and Dutch government should be doing more to acknowledge them.
For people watching who want to know like the reality of the survivors of that history, like what would you tell people?
Karena khusus pemerintah Indonesia dan pemerintah Belanda kan tidak mengakui itu. Yang mengakui maksudnya moyang-moyang kita yang historinya itu kan terpampang di Banda saja, tapi orang itu kan pahlawan, kalau boleh dikatakan pahlawan nasional genosida awal di Indonesia itu.
I started this project just wanting to explain what nutmeg fruit tastes like. I never would have imagined that it would lead to me discussing sensitive ethno-political topics that I know nothing about with the son of a king for a community of people that I only recently learned about. So forgive me for not going into this further. It is far beyond my qualifications and far beyond my capabilities.
Well. Well, like, I feel like I've been on a journey too. Like, I really just wanted to explore some of the myths of capitalism and free market ideologies, basically, which is like, free markets kind of exist in this state where everybody just equally exchanges with one another. So it's based on the ideas, the liberal values of equality, because like everybody that's in that trade relationship are equals, right? And then there's the idea of freedom, so liberty, which comes from liberal ideals, which are based in the free market as well. So like people are free to enter into exchange like in any way that they so choose. And so like obviously the spice trade, while it's been going on obviously for millennia, not just centuries and stuff like that, which is the context window that we're looking at here, capitalism itself was definitely founded in these times where you had the spice trade picking up in a European context, because they wanted to basically get like a hold on like the trade that was coming into Europe from like the Silk Route and stuff like that. So they wanted to kind of basically monopolize or take matters into their own hands in that sense. And this is also the context as well where the Americas are being discovered. So American blood-soaked silver and gold are being exported back to the European mainland. They're like basically trailblazing themselves through Southeast Asia as well, and like colonizing people. So like while capitalism and the free market ideology might kind of expunge or like kind of espouse, this sentiment of equality and liberty in order to ensure that, I guess, the free market can exist, or market conditions can exist to create an amicable society. Its history is one that is in complete contradiction to the free market ideology, which is like they go in, they monopolize trade routes to kind of to basically take a hold of entire markets and ramp up prices, which is kind of basically flies in the face of the idea of equal exchange, because like if you monopolize something and hold someone, like basically if you act violently on another person, that really flies in the face of the idea of freedom as well. So like market principles are founded on basically the expropriation of other people's wealth, the eradication of entire cultures. And I say cultures because they're just not wiping out like the people, the Bandanese themselves. Like what he's shown right at the end here is like their culture, while it survived, it jumped ship literally, and has kind of survived for about 400 years. Elements of their culture are dying out, and this is kind of the effect of this early stage capitalistic process. And so like we've been on quite a journey here, and like it's all been to paint the picture that like, yes, early stage capitalism has the same kind of problems, let's call it, as early stage or experiments with communism and socialism in places like the USSR and China and like South America and all that sort of stuff. If they've been embroiled with kind of violence, if they've been embroiled with systems that try to figure themselves out and go between, controlling markets and not controlling markets and monopolizing things and producing black markets for things, and exploiting populations and stuff like that. This just seems to be kind of the birthing process of a new mode of production. And so the question really is then, from a revolutionary perspective, is like, how far are we down the road of this historical and evolutionary transition from a capitalist mode of production into some other proceeding form of production? And so, like, if what we saw in the 20th century were just the early dabbles in it, just like the early dabbles in capitalistic relations and free market relations were like this, like, how long is it? 400 years that we have to wait? Is it half of that, given the rapidity of change under capitalism? Is it 200 years from the 20th century? So will we see such a change by the end of the 21st century? A completely revolutionary change into a new mode of production? Time will tell. But like, history and the study of history, especially like this, in terms of the economics of history, gives us a good window into what we could expect from the future. Now, I'm going to leave it there, but I just want to say a massive, massive thank you to everyone that has been involved. This has honestly been, I think, in terms of interaction and people coming in and like talking and being here at the same time and watching this, like, this has been one of the best live streams that we've had here on the channel. So thank you all for being a part of it. Big shout out to anyone who's interacted. Outspeaker, Squeeb, Beasts and Gods, 4IS, thank you. Wings of Cheese, Reality Pixel Media, Pete's Perspective. Thank you to all of you for interacting. It's made it quite interesting, and we've learned some crazy stuff today, some very interesting stuff. I didn't realize how impactful nutmeg was. Like, I knew that, like, potatoes were pretty impactful. I knew that coffee was pretty impactful. Like, certain agricultural goods have really changed the world. Cotton being another one. Like, but like nutmeg, like, who would have thought that nutmeg landed the British New York? And like I said, New York is, like, up until very recently, you could argue maybe it's not anymore, but like, let's just say, for argument's sake, it is. New York is the capital of the citadel of world capitalism. Like, America is the citadel of world capitalism today, and New York is, as its financial hub, is the capital, like the crown jewel of the capitalist world order. And it was traded for an island that is, that wouldn't even form like common knowledge to most people, I would say. I'd never heard about the abandoned islands before looking at this video, and like, it was traded for New York, or one of the islands, a tiny island, was traded for New York, which that's incredible. But like, such was trade relations at this very tumultuous point in history. So yes, thank you again for everyone joining. Just like, keep in your minds that at the beginning of a new mode of production, which is a great transitional period, it is chaotic, and like, it's not as mythologized, like in a nice utopic way, as people will make it out to be, because like this guy has mentioned, a lot of the history is written by the colonialists themselves, as opposed to the subjugated and oppressed people. So right now, the history on early communist societies and attempts at communism and socialism are being written by those same colonialists and those victors, the capitalists themselves. So keep that in mind when considering your history, ladies and gentlemen. So with that, I bid you all adieu. Happy Friday. I hope you guys have a good weekend. And we will be back next week for more live stream action. Oh yeah. Yes, if you haven't, the links are right there. Please go to the Discord, join there. Please support on Patreon. Go and become a member. You can do so for free. I can get notifications to you. It's very important for me to be able to get notifications to all of you. So please go and sign up on Patreon and become a member for free. But like, if you can contribute financially, I'm not going to say no. So yes, Have a good rest of your days, and I will see you next week for some more live stream action. And until next time, please remember, as always, I am, you are, we are a MysterE.